Good morning, and thank you for joining us for the 5 News Yule Log, sponsored by Great American Cookies in Fort Smith and Rogers.
Merry Christmas. You may notice it looks a little different than your typical morning newscast, but today we're doing something a little different. We're doing this to let our 5 News family spend time with their loved ones. For the next 2 hours, we're going to have a little holiday fun. We'll have a Yule Log show with cozy, crackling fire, some holly jolly music, and readings of classic Christmas stories by some of your friends here at 5 News. But if you're hoping to still get caught up on some of the latest news while getting in the holiday spirit with us, good news, you can do both. While watching us here, you can still get your news, weather, and sports right now at 5newsonline.com and 5+. All you have to do is search for KFSM on Roku or Fire Stick TV or on the 5 News app on your phone. Now, let's get to the festivities. I'm going to start our morning off with one of my favorite poems for this time of year, The Three Kings by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. 3 kings came riding from afar, Melchior and Gaspar and Balthazar. 3 wise men out of the east were they, and they traveled by night and they slept by day. For their guide was a beautiful, wonderful star. The star was so beautiful, large and clear, that all the other stars of the sky became a white mist in the atmosphere. And by this they knew that the coming was near of the prince foretold in the prophecy. 3 caskets they bore on their saddle bows, 3 caskets of gold with golden keys. Their robes were of crimson silk with rows of bells and pomegranates and fur belows. Their turbans like blossoming almond trees. And so the 3 kings rode into the west, through the dusk of the night over hill and dell. And sometimes they nodded with beard on breast, and sometimes talked as they paused to rest, with people that they met at some wayside well. Of the child that is born, said Balthazar, good people, I pray you, tell us the news. For we in the east have seen his star, and have ridden fast and have ridden far, to find and worship the King of the Jews. And the people answered, you ask in vain. We know of no king but Herod the Great. They thought the wise men were men insane, as they spurred their horses across the plain like riders in haste who cannot wait. And when they came to Jerusalem, Herod the Great, who had heard this thing, sent for the wise men and questioned them and said, go down into Bethlehem and bring me tidings of this new king. So they rode away, and the star stood still, the only one in the gray of morn. Yes, it stopped. It stood still on its own free will, right over Bethlehem on the hill, the city of David, where Christ was born. And the 3 kings rode through the gate and the guard, through the silent street till their horses turned, and neighed as they entered the great end yard. But the windows were closed and the doors were barred, and only a light in the stable burned. And cradled there in the scented hay, and the air made sweet by the breath of kine, the little child in the manger lay, the child that would be king one day of a kingdom not human, but divine. His mother, Mary of Nazareth, sat watching beside his place of rest, watching the even flow of his breath. For the joy of life and the terror of death were mingled together in her breast. They laid their offerings at his feet. The gold was their tribute to a king. The frankincense with its odor sweet was for the priest, the paraclete, the myrrh for the body's burying. And the woman wondered and bowed her head and sat as still as a statue of stone. Her heart was troubled, yet comforted, remembering what the angel had said of an endless reign and of David's throne. Then the kings rode out of the city gate with a clatter of hoofs and proud array. But they went not back to Herod the Great, for they knew his malice and feared his hate, and they returned to their homes by another way. Merry Christmas. We hope you have a great day.
Bells of holly, fa la 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 la. 'Tis the season to be jolly, fa la 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 la. Don we now our gay apparel, fa la 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 la. Try the ancient Yuletide carol, fa la 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 la. See the blazing Yule before us, fa la 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 la. Strike the harp and join the chorus, fa la 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 la. Follow me in merry measure, fa la 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 la. While I tell of Yuletide treasure, fa la 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 la.
Happy holidays. I'm Michael Wilson. I want to read you a section from the author of The Wizard of Oz, L. Frank Baum's book, The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus, titled How Claus Made the First Toy. Truly, our Claus had wisdom for his good fortune, but strengthened his resolve to befriend the little ones of his own race. He knew his plan was approved by the immortals, else they would not have favored him so greatly. So he began at once to make acquaintance with mankind. He walked through the valley to the plain beyond and crossed the plain in many directions to reach the abodes of men. These stood singly or in groups of dwellings called villages, and in nearly all the houses, whether big or little, Claus found children. Only at the beautiful palace of the Lord of Lurd and the frowning castle of the Baron Bron was Claus refused admittance. There were children at both places, but the servants at the palace shut the door in the young stranger's face, and the fierce Bron threatened to hang him from an iron hook on the castle walls. Whereupon Claus sighed and went back to the poor dwellings where he was welcomed. One day snowflakes filled all the air in the laughing valley, dancing boisterously toward the earth and clothing in pure white remnant of the roof of Claus's dwelling. At night, Jack Frost rapped on the door. "Come in," cried Claus. "Come out," answered Jack, "for you have a fire inside." So Claus, he came out. He had known Jack Frost in the forest and liked the jolly rogue, and even, well, he mistreated him. "There will be a rare sport for me tonight," Claus shouted the sprite. "Isn't this glorious weather? I shall nip scores of noses and ears and toes before daybreak." "If you love me, Jack, spare the children," begged Claus. "And why?" asked the other in surprise. "They are tender and helpless," answered Claus. "But I love to nip the tender ones," Jack declared. "The older ones are tough and tire my fingers. The young ones are weak and cannot fight you," said Claus. "True," Jack agreed thoughtfully. "Well, I will not pinch a child this night if I can resist the temptation," he promised. "Good night, Claus." "Good night." The young man went and closed the door, and Jack Frost ran to the nearest village. Claus threw a log on the fire, which burned brightly. Beside the hearth sat Blinky, a big cat given to him by Peter the Knock. Her fur was soft and glossy, and she purred never-ending songs of contentment. "I shall not see the children again soon," said Claus to the cat, who kindly paused in her song to listen. So passed many days and many long evenings. The cupboard was full, but Claus became weary, and having nothing to do more than to feed the fire from the big wood pile of the Nooks that was brought to him. One evening, he picked up a stick of wood and began to cut with his sharp knife. He had no thought at first except to occupy this time. He whistled and sang to the cat as he carved away portions of the stick. Puss sat up on her haunches and watched him, listening at the same time to her master's merry whistle, which she loved to hear even more than her own purring sounds. Claus glanced at Puss and then at a stick that he was whittling, until presently the wood began to have a shape, and the shape was like the head of a cat with 2 ears sticking up. Claus stopped whistling to laugh, and then he and the cat looked at the wooden image in surprise. Then he carved up the eyes and the nose and rounded the lower part of the head so that it had rested upon a neck. Puss hardly knew what to be made of it now, and sat up stiffly as if watching some suspicion would come next. Claus knew the head had given him idea. He plied his knife carefully with the skill, forming slowly the body of the cat, which he had made sit upon the haunches as the real cat did, with her tail wound around her front 2 legs. The work cost him much time, but the evening was long, and he had nothing better to do. Finally, he gave a loud and delighted laugh as a result of his labors and placed the wooden cat, now completed, upon the hearth opposite of the real one. Puss thereupon glared at her image, raised her hair in anger, and uttered a defiant mew. The wooden cat paid no attention, and Claus, much amused, laughed again. Then Blinky advanced toward the wooden image to eye it closely and smell of it intelligently. Eyes and nose told her the creature was wood, in spite of his natural appearance, so Puss resumed her seat and purring. But as she neatly washed her face with her padded paw, she cast one more admiring glance at the clever master. Perhaps she felt the same satisfaction we feel when we look upon good photographs of ourselves. The cat's master was himself pleased with his handiwork, without knowing exactly why. Indeed, he had great cause to congratulate himself that night, and all the children throughout the world should have joined him in rejoicing, for Claus had made his first toy.
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh, all the fields we go, laughing all the way. Bells on bobtails ring, making spirits bright. Oh, what fun it is to sing a sleighing song tonight! Oh, jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh! Hey, jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh! Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh. All the fields we go, laughing all the way. Bells on bobtail ring, making spirits bright. Oh, what fun it is to sing a sleighing song tonight! Oh, jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. Hey, jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh.
Good morning, I'm Erica Thomas. I hope you're having a magical Christmas. I am going to read another section from L. Frank Baum's The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus, The First Journey with the Reindeer. Those were happy days for Claus when he carried his accumulation of toys to the children who had awaited them so long. During his imprisonment in the valley, he had been so industrious that all his shelves were filled with playthings. And after quickly supplying the little ones living nearby, he saw he must now extend his travels to wider fields. Remembering the time when he had journeyed with Ak all through the world, he knew children were everywhere, and he longed to make as many as possible happy with his gifts. So he loaded a great sack of all kinds of toys, slung it upon his back that he might carry it more easily, and started off on a longer trip than he had yet undertaken. Wherever he showed his merry face in hamlet or in farmhouse, he received a cordial welcome, for his fame had spread into far lands. At each village, the children swarmed about him, following his footsteps wherever he went, and the women thanked him gratefully for the joy he brought their little ones. And the men looked upon him curiously that he should devote his time to such a queer occupation as toy making. But everyone smiled on him and gave him kindly words, and Claus felt amply repaid for his long journey. When the sack was empty, he went back again to the Laughing Valley and once more filled it to the brim. This time he followed another road into a different part of the country and carried happiness to many children who never before had owned a toy or guessed that such a delightful plaything existed. After a third journey, so far away that Claus was many days walking the distance, the store of toys became exhausted, and without delay, he set about making a fresh supply. From seeing so many children and studying their tastes, he had acquired several new ideas about toys. The dollies were, he had found, the most delightful of all playthings for babies and little girls, and often those who could not say dolly and call for a doll in their sweet baby talk. So Claus resolved to make many dolls of all sizes and to dress them in bright colored clothing. The older boys and even some of the girls loved the images of animals, so he still made cats and elephants and horses. And many of the little fellows had musical natures and longed for drums and cymbals and whistles and horns. So he made a number of toy drums with tiny sticks to beat them with, and he made whistles from the willow trees and horns from the bog reeds and cymbals from bits of beaten metal. All this kept him busily at work, and before he realized it, the winter season came with deeper snows than usual, and he knew he could not leave the valley with his heavy pack. Moreover, the next trip would take him farther from home than ever before, and Jack Frost was mischievous enough to nip his nose and ears if he undertook the long journey while the Frost King reigned. The Frost King was Jack's father and never reproved him for his pranks. So Claus remained at his workbench, but he whistled and sang as merrily as ever, for he would allow no disappointment to sour his temper or make him unhappy. One bright morning, he looked from his window and saw two of the deer he had known in the forest walking toward his house. Claus was surprised, not that the friendly deer should visit him, but that they walked on the surface of the snow as easily as if it were solid ground, notwithstanding the fact that throughout the valley, the snow lay many feet deep. He had walked out of his house a day or two before and had sunk to his armpits in a drift. So when the deer came near, he opened the door and called to them. "Good morning, Flossie. Tell me how you were able to walk on the snow so easily." "It was frozen hard," answered Flossie. "The Frost King had breathed on it," said Glossie, coming up, "and the surface is now as solid as ice." "Perhaps," remarked Claus thoughtfully, "I might now carry my pack of toys to the children." "Is it a long journey?" asked Flossie. "Yes, it will take me many days, for the pack is heavy," answered Claus. "Then the snow would melt before you could get back," said the deer. "You must wait until spring, Claus." Claus sighed. "Had I your fleet feet," he said, "I could make that journey in a day." "But you had not," returned Glossie, looking at his own slender legs with pride. "Perhaps I could ride upon your back," Claus ventured to remark after a pause. "Oh no, our backs are not strong enough to bear your weight," said Flossie decidedly. "But if you had a sledge and could harness us to it, we might draw you easily, and your pack as well." "I'll make a sledge," exclaimed Claus. "Will you agree to draw me if I do?" "Well," replied Flossie, "we might go first and ask the Knooks, who are our guardians, for permission, but if they consent and you can make a sledge and harness, we will gladly assist you." "Then go at once," cried Claus eagerly. "I'm sure the friendly Knooks will give their consent, and by the time you are back, I shall be ready to harness you to my sledge." Flossie and Glossie, being deer of much intelligence, had long wished to see the great world, so they gladly ran over the frozen snow to ask the Knooks if they could carry Claus on his journey. Meantime, the toy maker hurriedly began the construction of a sledge, using material from his wood pile. He made two long runners that turned upward toward the front ends, and across these nailed short boards to make a platform. It was soon completed, but was as rude in appearance as it was possible for a sledge to be. The harness was more difficult to prepare. The Claus twisted strong cords together and knotted them so they could fit around the necks of the deer in the shape of a collar. From these ran other cords to fasten the deer to the front of the sledge. Before the work was completed, Glossie and Flossie were back from the forest, having been granted permission by Will Nook to make the journey with Claus, provided they would to Bercy by daybreak the next morning. "That is not a very long time," said Flossie, "but we are swift and strong, and if we get started by this evening, we can travel many miles during the night." Claus decided to make the attempt, so he hurried on his preparations as fast as possible. After a time, he fastened the collars around the necks of his steeds and harnessed them to his rude sledge. Then he placed a stool on the little platform to serve as a seat and filled a sack with his prettiest toys. "How do you intend to guide us?" asked Glossie. "We've never been out of the forest before, except to visit your house, so we shall not know the way." Claus thought about that for a moment. Then he brought more cords and fastened two of them to the spreading antlers of each deer, one on the right, the other on the left. "Those will be my reins," said Claus. "And when I pull them to the right or the left, you must go in that direction. But if I do not pull the reins, you may go straight ahead." "Very well," answered Glossie and Flossie, and then they asked, "Are you ready?" Claus seated himself upon the stool, placed the sack of toys at his feet, and then gathered up the reins. "All ready," he shouted. "Away we go." The deer leaned forward, lifted their slender limbs, and the next moment away flew the sledge over the frozen snow. The swiftness of the motion surprised Claus, for in a few strides they were across the valley and gliding over the broad plain beyond. The day had melted into evening by the time they started, for swiftly as Claus had worked, many hours had been consumed in making his preparations. But the moon shone brightly to light their way, and Claus soon decided it would be just as pleasant to travel by night as by day. The deer liked it better, for although they wished to see something of the world, they were timid about meeting men, and now all the dwellers in the towns and farmhouses were sound asleep and could not see them. Away and away they sped, on and on, over the hills and through the valleys and across the plains, until they reached a village where Claus had never been before. Here he called on them to stop, and they immediately obeyed. But a new difficulty now presented itself, for the people had locked their doors when they went to bed, and Claus found he could not enter the houses to leave his toys. "I'm afraid, my friends, we have made our journey for nothing," said he, "for I shall be obliged to carry my playthings back home again without giving them to the children of this village." "What's the matter?" asked Flossie. "The doors are locked," answered Claus, "and I cannot get in." Flossie looked around at the houses. The snow was quite deep in that village, and just before them was a roof only a few feet above the sledge. A broad chimney, which seemed to Glossie big enough to admit Claus, was at the peak of the roof. "Why don't you climb down that chimney?" asked Glossie. Claus looked at it. "Well, that would be easy enough if I were on top of the roof," he answered. "And hold fast, and we will take you there," said the deer. And they gave one bound to the roof and landed beside the big chimney. "Good!" cried Claus, well pleased, and he slung the pack of toys over his shoulder and got into the chimney. There was plenty of soot on the bricks, but he didn't mind that. By placing his hands and knees against the sides, he crept downward until he had reached the fireplace. Leaping lightly over the smoldering coals, he found himself in a large living room where a dim light was burning. From the room, two doorways led to smaller chambers. In one, a woman lay asleep with a baby beside her in a crib. Claus laughed because he did not laugh aloud for fear of waking the baby. Then he slipped a big doll from his pack and laid it in the crib. The little one smiled as if it dreamed of a pretty plaything it would to find in the morning, and Claus crept softly from the room and entered at the other doorway. Here were two boys fast asleep with their arms around each other's neck. Claus gazed at them lovingly a moment and then placed upon the bed a drum, two horns, and a wooden elephant. He did not linger now that his work in this house was done, but climbed the chimney again and seated himself on his sledge. "Can you find another chimney?" he asked the reindeer. "Easily enough," replied Glossie and Flossie. Down to the edge of the roof they raced, and then, without pausing, leaped through the air to the top of the next building, where a huge, old-fashioned chimney stood. "Don't be so long this time," called Flossie, "or we shall never make it back to the forest by daybreak." Claus made a trip down this chimney also and found 5 children sleeping in the house, all of whom were quickly supplied with toys. When he returned, the deer sprang to the next roof, but on descending the chimney, Claus found no children there at all. That was not often the case in this village. However, so he lost less time than you might suppose in visiting the dreary homes where there were no little ones. When he had climbed down the chimneys of all the houses in that village and had left a toy for every sleeping child, Claus found that his great sack was not yet half emptied. "Onward, friends," he called to the deer. "We must seek another village." So away they dashed, although it was long past midnight, and in a surprisingly short time they came to a large city, the largest Claus had ever visited since he began to make toys. But nothing daunted by the throng of houses, he set to work at once, and his beautiful steeds carried him rapidly from one roof to another, only the highest being beyond the leaps of the agile deer. At last, the supply of toys was exhausted, and Claus seated himself in the sledge with the empty sack at his feet and turned the heads of Glossie and Flossie toward home.
Streetlights burning brightly, bringing back sweet memories. I've been away for so long, I miss my friends and family. A cold December breeze blowing gently on my face. Strangely feels like a warm embrace, and then I think to myself, gotta get home, gotta get home, gotta get home for Christmas. Gotta get home, gotta get home, gotta get home. Town and see the faces that I know. They always welcome me back. Nowhere else I'd rather go at this time of year. So gotta get home, gotta get home, gotta get home for Christmas. Gotta get home, gotta get home, gotta get home for Christmas. And now the snow is starting to fall. It makes the city streets shine like diamonds. And then I hear a distant robin call. The beauty that surrounds us this time of year. So I gotta get home, gotta get home, gotta get home for Christmas. Gotta get home, gotta get home, gotta get home for Christmas. Streetlights burning brightly, bringing back sweet memories. Gotta get home, gotta get home, gotta get home for Christmas. Gotta get home, gotta get home for Christmas.
Feliz Navidad and Merry Christmas to everyone. I'm Jose Carranza and I would like to read a story for everyone at home, including my daughter. This is a great story by the Brothers Grimm called The Elves and the Shoemaker. There was once a shoemaker who worked very hard and was very honest, but still he could not earn enough to live upon. And at last, all he had in the world was gone, save just leather enough to make one pair of shoes. Then he cut his leather out, all ready to make up the next day, meaning to rise early in the morning to his work. His conscience was clear, and his heart light amidst all of his troubles. So he went peaceably to bed, left all his cares to heaven, and soon fell asleep. In the morning, after he had said his prayers, he sat himself down to his work, when to his great wonder, there stood the shoes already made upon the table. The good man knew not what to say or think at such an odd thing happening. He looked at the workmanship, there was not one false stitch in the whole job. All was so neat and true that it was quite a masterpiece. The same day, a customer came in, and the shoes suited him so well that he willingly paid a price higher than usual for them. And the poor shoemaker, with the money, bought leather enough to make 2 pairs more. In the evening, he cut out the work and went to bed early, that he might get up and begin bed betimes next day. But he was saved all the trouble, for when he got up in the morning, the work was done ready to his hand. Soon in came buyers, who paid him handsomely for his goods, so that he bought leather enough for 4 pair more. He cut out the work again overnight, and found it done in the morning, as before, and so it went on for some time. What was got ready in the evening was already done by daybreak, and the good man soon became thriving and well off again. One evening, about Christmas time, as he and his wife were sitting over the fire chatting together, he said to her, "I should like to sit up and watch tonight, that we may see who it is that comes and does my work for me." The wife liked the thought, and so they left a light burning, and hid themselves in a corner of the room behind a curtain that was hung up there, and watched what would happen. As soon as it was midnight, there came in 2 little naked dwarfs, and they sat themselves upon the shoemaker's bench, took up all the work that was cut out, and began to ply with their little fingers, stitching and wrapping and tapping away at such a rate that the shoemaker was all wonder and could not take his eyes off them. And on they went, till the job was quite done, and the shoes stood ready for use upon the table. This was long before daybreak, and then they bustled away as quick as lightning. The next day, the wife said to the shoemaker, "These little wights have made us rich. We ought to be thankful to them and do them a good turn if we can. I am quite sorry to see them run about as they do, and indeed it is not very decent, for they have nothing upon their backs to keep off the cold. I'll tell you what, I will make each of them a shirt and a coat and a waistcoat, and a pair of pantaloons into the bargain, and do you make each of them a little pair of shoes." The thought pleased the cobbler very much, and one evening, when all the things were ready, they laid them on the table, instead of the work that they used to cut out, and then went and hid themselves to watch what the little elves will do. About midnight, in they came in, dancing and skipping, hopped round the room, and then went to sit down to their work as usual. But when they saw the clothes lying for them, they laughed and chuckled, and seemed mightily delighted. Then they dressed themselves in the twinkling of an eye, and danced and capered and sprang about, as merry as could be, till at last they danced out the door and away over the green. The good couple saw them no more, but everything went well with them from that time forward, as long as they lived. Feliz Navidad. Merry Christmas to everybody.
It's a magic time of year. Oh, now everyone is here. Decorations hardly bling. Santa's landing, sleigh bells are ring. I like it when you dance to my song. I like the way you try to sing along. Now it's time for Christmas cheer. Santa Claus is coming here. It's the perfect time to shine with the mistletoe and wine, with my friends and family, having lots of fun with me. The bells are ringing out today, telling me it's time to play, banging on that drum. It's Christmas time for everyone. Whoa, oh, 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 oh. Yeah. Santa's coming. I like it when you dance to my song. I like the way you try to sing along. Now it's time for Christmas cheer. Santa Claus is coming here. It's the perfect time to shine. Oh, yeah. With the mistletoe and wine. With my friends and family. Having lots of fun with me. The bells are ringing out today. Telling me it's time to play. Banging on that drum. It's Christmas time for everyone. It's the perfect time to shine. With the mistletoe and wine. With my friends and family. Having lots of fun with me. The bells are ringing out today. Telling me it's time to play. Banging on that drum. It's Christmas time for everyone.
Merry Christmas. I hope the weather this morning is perfect for you and your family. Now, I'm going to read our last section from L. Frank Baum's story. This section is about the first Christmas tree. All right, here we go. Claus had always kept his promise to the Knooks by returning to the Laughing Valley by daybreak, but only the swiftness of his reindeer has enabled him to do this, for he travels all over the world. He loved his work, and he loved the brisk night ride on his sled and a gay tinkle of the sleigh bells. On that first trip with the 10 reindeer, only Glossie and Flossie wore bells. But each year thereafter, for 8 years, Claus carried presents to the children of the Gnome King, and that good-natured monarch gave him in return a string of bells at each visit, so that finally every one of the 10 reindeer was supplied. And you may imagine what a merry tune the bells played as the sledge sped over the snow. The children's stockings were so long that it required a great many toys to fill them, and soon Claus found there were other things besides toys that the children loved. So he sent some of the fairies, who were always his good friends, into the tropics, from whence they returned with their great bags full of oranges and bananas which they had plucked from the trees. And the other fairies flew to the wonderful valley of Funnyland, where delicious candies and bonbons grew thickly on the bushes and returned laden with many boxes of sweetmeats for the little ones. These things Santa Claus, on each Christmas Eve, placed in the long stockings, together with his toys, and the children were glad to get them, you may be sure. There were also warm countries where there is no snow in the winter, but Claus and his reindeer visited them as well as the colder climates, for there were little wheels inside the runners of his sledge, which permitted it to run as smoothly over bare ground as on the snow. And the children who lived in the warm countries learned to know the name of Santa Claus as well as those who lived nearer to the Laughing Valley. Once, just as the reindeer were ready to start on their yearly trip, a fairy came to Claus and told him of 3 little children who lived beneath a rude tent of skins on a broad plain where there were no trees whatsoever. These poor babies were miserable and unhappy, for their parents were ignorant people who neglected them sadly. Claus resolved to visit these children before he returned home, and during his ride, he picked up the bushy top of a pine tree, which the wind had broken off, and he then placed it in his sledge. It was nearly morning when the deer stopped before the lonely tents of skins where the poor children lay asleep. Claus at once planted the bit of pine tree in the sand and stuck many candles on the branches. Then he hung some of the prettiest toys on the tree, as well as several bags of candies. It did not take long to do all of this, for Santa Claus works quickly. And when all was ready, he lighted the candles and, thrusting his head into the opening of the tent, he shouted, "Merry Christmas, little ones!" With that, he leaped into his sledge and was out of sight before the children, rubbing the sleep from their eyes. He could come out to see who had called them. You can imagine the wonder and the joy of those little ones who had never in their lives known a real pleasure before. But when they saw the tree sparkling with lights that shone brightly in the gray dawn and hung with toys enough to make them happy for years to come, they joined hands and danced around the tree, shouting and laughing until they were all obliged to pause for breath. And their parents also came out to look and wonder, and thereafter had more respect and consideration for their children, since Santa Claus had honored them with such beautiful gifts. The idea of the Christmas tree pleased Claus, and so the following year he carried many of them with his sledge and set them up in the homes of poor people who seldom saw trees, and placed candles and toys on the branches. Of course, he could not carry enough trees in one load for all of those who wanted them, but in some of the homes, the fathers were able to get trees and have them all ready for Santa Claus when he arrived, and these, the good Claus, always decorated as prettily as possible and hung with toys enough for all the children who came to see the tree lighted. These novel ideas and the generous manner in which they were carried out made the children long for that one night in the year when their friend Santa Claus should visit them. And as such anticipation is very pleasant and comforting, the little ones gleaned much happiness by wondering what would happen when Santa Claus arrived next. Perhaps you remember that stern Baron Braun, who once drove Claus from his castle and forbade him to visit his children. Well, many years afterward, when the old Baron was dead and his son ruled in his place, the new Baron Braun came to the house of Claus with his train of knights and pages and henchmen, and, dismounting from his charger, bared his head humbly before the friend of children. "My father did not know your goodness and worth," he said, "and therefore threatened to hang you from the castle walls. But I have children of my own who long for a visit from Santa Claus, and I have come to beg you that you will favor them hereafter as you do the other children." Claus was pleased with this speech, for Castle Braun was the only place he had never visited, and he gladly promised to bring presents to the Baron's children on the next Christmas Eve. Then Baron went away contented, and Claus kept his promise faithfully. Thus did this man, through very goodness, conquer the hearts of all, and it's no wonder he was ever merry and gay, for there was no home in the wide world where he was not welcomed more royally than any king.
We all did this time last year, on this certain frosty holiday filled with cheer. I hope we never change the plans that we arranged. Say, how about we stay? Let's do Christmas by the fire. All of us together here tonight, with our friends and family. Oh, what a perfect sight. On this cold frozen night, the twinkle of the lights. Come on inside and we'll do Christmas by the fire. We can go to far places, but there's one thing that
wanna spend this time warm on a cold night. It's the perfect plan. I hope each year will find us right back here for another white Christmas, friends and family near. We always keep it fresh, and it's a joy I must confess. And so I will say, hey, let's do Christmas by the fire.
Oh, I am having the best time watching Channel 5's Yule Log special before I turn in for my long winter's nap. But I wanted to share a very special poem that Matt's story reminded me of. It's called The Christmas Tree by J.C. Shearer. Oh, the Christmas tree, green are the boughs of the Christmas tree. And wherever I am, on the land or the sea, there always appears at this season to me the vision bright of a Christmas tree. I have been in lands where ice and snow were all around, above and below. But even then I caught the glow, shimmering over a wintry sea, from a distant land and the Christmas tree. In lands that are scorched by a tropical sun, where summer and winter are both as one, I have stood on the shore when the day was done and caught the echoes of innocent glee from a faraway land and a Christmas tree. Let the voices of sorrow and mourning cease, and the mourner break forth in a carol of peace, for over each care like a golden fleece fall the halo of love with its benison free. Oh, the hearts that are cheered by the Christmas tree. Away with all doubts, all cares and fears. It is not the season for sighs and tears, for down through the 1800 years comes a voice that is saying to you and to me, rejoice, for I gave you the Christmas tree. Brightly the stars may be shining tonight, that moon flood the world with its silvery light, or the clouds hide the moon and the stars from our sight, but we care not how heavy the darkness may be. There's no cloud or the light of the Christmas tree. There are gifts here for all, for the young and the old. Here are trinkets and toys of more value than gold. May the warm hearts that proffer them never grow cold, but look back from the heights of the future to be at the bright shining lights of the Christmas tree. Oh, the beautiful Christmas tree, the Christmas tree! 'Tis a beautiful sight for the eye to see, the cheerful wave of its branches green, and friendship's gifts that are placed between. Oh, a beautiful sight is the Christmas tree. A wonderful poem and a wonderful evening. Have a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh.
Hey everybody, Darren Bob here. Welcome to my home on this Christmas morning. We hope you're having a great Christmas morning. I want to say thank you for allowing our staff to have this morning off so they can spend time with family and friends. And a real big thank you as well for letting us into your home each and every morning and night right here on 5 News. And before we go this morning, I want to read one of my favorites. This is one my parents used to read to us when we were kids and grandkids, of course, The Night Before Christmas by Clement Moore. 'Twas the night before Christmas, and all through the house, not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. Children all nestled all snug in their beds, with visions of sugar plums dancing in their heads. And Mama in her kerchief and I in my cap had just settled down for a long winter's nap. When out on the lawn there rose such a clatter, I sprang from my bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters and threw up the sash. The moon on the breast of the new fallen snow gave a luster of midday to objects below, when what to my wondering eyes should appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer with a little old driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment it must be St. Nick. More rapid than eagles his courses they came. He whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donner and Blitzen. To the top of the porch, to the top of the wall, now dash away, dash away, dash away all. As dry leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, when they meet with an obstacle, mount to the sky, so up to the housetop the courses they flew, with a sleigh of toys and St. Nicholas too. And then the twinkling of I heard on the roof, the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. As I drew in my head and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur from his head to his foot. His clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his sack. His eyes, how they twinkled, his dimples, how merry. His cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard of his chin was as white as the snow. The stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke it encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face and a little round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. He was chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, and I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work and filled all the stockings, then turned with a jerk, and laying his finger aside of his nose, and giving a nod, up the chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and away they flew like the down of a thistle. But I heard him exclaim ere he drove out of sight, Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night. Now you know why it's one of my favorites. Again, if you want to watch this program again, you can do so on our 5 Plus app. You can find it on Roku TV, also on Fire Stick TV, and on our 5 News app that you can download on your mobile phone. And again, if you want to see all the news and headlines and sports throughout the rest of the year, it's 5newsonline.com. Now, there are a lot of people who put a lot of time in every day to make 5 News what it is every day of the year. You don't get to see them, but we want to recognize those folks who do that hard work every single day. Have a great Christmas, and we will see you back here tomorrow.
We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Good tidings we bring to you and your king. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. We all want some piggy pudding. We all want some piggy pudding. We all want some piggy pudding. So bring some out here. Good tidings we bring to you and your king. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. We won't
Merry Christmas.